Welcome back, everybody. Josh Collacchi here, RotoCurve, and we're here to discuss FanDuel Week 3 NFL Daily Fantasy Football. And right now we're going to talk about wide receivers. Of course, last week was a very successful week with wide receivers. We had guys like Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, Larry Fitzgerald caught 3 touchdown passes, and even on Monday night with Eric Decker and Donte Moncrief each catching touchdown passes as well. So let's get right back into it. It's a passing league, which means a lot of receivers have a lot of value. So let's get right into it for Week 3. My top-tier receiver, and I think a guy that's worth paying up for almost every week because of his consistency, is Antonio Brown, wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, he's the most expensive player on FanDuel at $9,300. He's higher than Aaron Rodgers, higher than Andrew Luck, higher than Tom Brady, even his new teammate coming back in Le'Veon Bell. Now, is that worth paying for? Is a guy that needs to be the top finisher in terms of price, is he worth paying for? Absolutely. This guy has been absolutely incredible for the last 2.5 years now. In 34 straight games, I believe it is now, the streak just continues to grow. He has 5 catches and 50 yards. That's not or. That's not 5 catches or 50 yards in each game. That's and. So that's a minimum of 7.5 fantasy points on FanDuel, which is a really impressive floor. It's the highest of any position player. And honestly, the floor is a lot higher than that because he's not just getting 5 catches for 50 yards. He's getting much more than that. He's scoring touchdowns. And honestly, he makes a case for one of the best receivers in the NFL, if not the best right now, considering the fact that he's just been super productive in the last year and a half. Now, in Week 3, which is what we're talking about, daily fantasy sports, it's just one game, it's just 1 week. On FanDuel, you want to look for the guy that's going to be the #1 finisher at the position. And I think that's what Antonio Brown can be this week against Janoris Jenkins and the St. Louis Rams. If you've watched Jenkins play for his entire career, when he was in college, when he was a rookie, and all the way through his career, he's been a very, very aggressive corner. And if you watch Antonio Brown play, this could not be a better matchup for him. The one thing about Jenkins is he likes to bite on pretty much every curl route, every double move route. And if you've watched football and you've watched how the Steelers run, the one thing about Brown is he really loves those curl routes. He goes 5 yards, he goes 8 yards, he goes 10 yards, he stops and turns around. Now, Jenkins will look to try to pick those passes off. He's done it his entire career. So with Ben Roethlisberger throwing a pump fake and Jenkins biting on it, Antonio Brown's going to be gone. Now, not to mention he lines up in the slot as well, so the Rams don't have many cover corners that can be successful against a route runner like Brown. So I expect him to have yet another huge game, and he's my top player at the very deep position of wide receiver. Now, my second-tier receiver is actually a guy that I think is a top-tier player this week, but he's in Tier 2 because of his price, and that's Brandon Marshall for the New York Jets. Eric Decker is probably going to miss this week's game against the Eagles because of an injury, and that basically makes Brandon Marshall the top target in cash games for me, aside from Antonio Brown, of course, simply because he's going to see a ton of targets, a ton of catches. He's going to get all the work in the red zone, and you have to look at his matchup. That Eagles defense has been good, but they have the worst corner in the NFL through 2 weeks. I'm comfortable saying that because of the numbers. It's Byron Maxwell. He's allowed a perfect passer rating of 158.3 in coverage. He gave up a really lazy touchdown to Terrence Williams. He got burned a ton by Julio Jones in Week 1. And with Brandon Marshall's strength, he's still a good route runner, and he's still pretty quick considering his size and his age. I think he's going to light up Byron Maxwell again, and you're going to see 3 weeks in a row that new Eagles corner just getting lit up. But the one thing about Marshall is he has some of the strongest hands in the NFL, and with Decker being out, look for those hands to be put to good use, as I expect him to see at least a dozen targets this week. My third-tier receiver is a guy we talked about last week, and I'm actually going to like him pretty much every week until his price rises, and that's Donte Moncrief, which is $6,000 on FanDuel. That's impressive because you're looking at a guy like that that's really making his way to stardom, really. He's a really young receiver. He has a ton of physical talent, and there's a lot of guys in front of him for that team, for the Colts. Andre Johnson, T.Y. Hilton, and they drafted Philip Dorsett as well. So there's a lot of guys there in front of him, and he's still making his targets count. He's still making his receptions count. He's seeing a lot of targets from Andrew Luck, and he's turning them into yards and fantasy points. So far, he's caught, I believe, 13 passes for 122 yards, or 156 yards, rather, and 2 touchdowns this season. But if you look at the 2 games he's had, he caught 6 passes in 1 game for 46 yards and a touchdown against the Bills. And in Week 2, just last week, he caught 7 for 122 and a touchdown against the Jets. Those are two of the best defenses in the NFL. They both have good cornerbacks. And, of course, you saw Cromartie and Darrelle Revis last week on Monday night for the Colts. So considering he's done that well against good defenses, against a bad defense like the Titans, who allowed 155 yards and 3 scores last week, including 2 to Travis Benjamin and the Browns, I think Moncrief has a very good matchup, especially against 2 corners that are a bit undersized in Parrish Cox and Jason McCourty. So I expect a guy like Moncrief to be well worth the $6,000 price tag he has on FanDuel, and I'm going to easily slot him as my third receiver in my cash games, and probably in GPP because of his upside and his price. Now, the other guy I wanted to mention is Stevie Johnson in this third tier. He has a bad matchup in terms of team, but that makes him a good matchup in terms of the individual one-on-one matchup you're going to see with a wide receiver in the corner. Now, of course, you're going to see the number 1 receiver for the Chargers, and Keenan Allen is going to be covered by the number 1 corner on the Minnesota Vikings, who their matchup is in Xavier Rhodes. Now, Rhodes is a very good, very physical young corner. He's been one of the better cover corners in the NFL for the last 2 years. So expect him to shade Keenan Allen and follow him around all over the place. And that's the one thing about the Vikings is they will use Rhodes to cover other people. And Keenan Allen's been a guy that's lined up in one slot in one spot for a lot of his career. Now, he may be moved around, but most of the time he's going to see Rhodes. And that opened things up for Stevie Johnson, which is a guy I like at just $5,900 on FanDuel. He's the number 2 guy. He's going to see less targets than Allen in a normal game. But with Xavier Rhodes on, which we just talked about, I think Johnson's going to see a lot more targets this week, and that means that he's going to see more production. And he already has a touchdown in each game, so what more can you ask for in terms of production and potential big game stardom for a guy that just costs $5,900? I think he's going to be very low owned because we just talked about Moncrief at $6,000. There are some other superstar receivers, and there is some value at other positions this week. So a guy like Johnson, who's the number 2 receiver, that's probably going to see the targets of a number 1 guy, makes for a very good play for me on FanDuel this week in week 3. Some other receivers just to touch up real quick are James Jones for the Packers. He's caught a touchdown in both games, and he looks like he's found his home again in Green Bay. He just continues to catch touchdowns from Aaron Rodgers. The other one is Doug Baldwin, who has just been a target hog. He catches a lot of passes, and he makes for a decent wide receiver 3 in cash games if you wanted to go away from a guy like Moncrief or a guy like Stevie Johnson. That wraps up our segment for this week on wide receivers. So be sure to go over to RotoCurve.com, check out all the tools, all of the new matchups, and all the data we put out there. It's free, so be sure to get your good use out of it. There's a lot of nice stuff over there that I use for my research, and a lot of people like to use their research for hopefully make some money in week 3 and for the rest of this NFL season. Let's make week 3 a profitable one. Good luck, everybody.